Hi, everyone. I'm Leah.
And I'm Ezra, and you are joining What's the Plan? If you're joining this, you're part of a movement to stop fascism in America via massive, broad-based, people-based power organizing. Now, we're in the middle of, Leah, what do we call this? A would-be authoritarian takeover, an authoritarian breakthrough moment. And there are a lot of people who will tell you how horrible things are. You can find that anywhere on the internet. They happen to be right. But we're trying to do something different here. We're trying to acknowledge that and work through it in real time, figuring out the best strategies that we together collectively can use and implement for resisting MAGA and fight back.
We do this together with you, the people who are organizing, getting active, and working in your community, or maybe who are looking for that community. Democracy is not a spectator sport. If we want to beat these fascist clowns, we all have to get off the field. There is no way out of this mess that does not require millions of us to get involved, stand up, and do our part. And by the way, we are married. We have been running Indivisible National together since we started it after Trump's first election. We bring our experience as former congressional staffers and do-gooder advocates to this work, but we are not the leaders of the Indivisible movement. There are thousands of local Indivisible groups all over the country, and they are led and operated by you, the folks who are listening. We got a great discussion today. Ezra is going to go over new members of the movement. He is going to talk about the current state of play in Congress on DHS funding. And we are joined by fan favorite and social movement expert extraordinaire, Erica Chenoweth, who will ground us and guide us. And then we're all going to go to your live questions. All right, Ezra, who do we have this week?
We have a lot of people this week. Every week I'm like, wow. A lot of people join. That's probably going to go down because that's how social movements normally work. And yet, still, we have too many new Indivisible groups for me to list all of them. We organize by local groups, Leah. That's what we do. This is not about you or me or any individual one of us. We have a theory about how political power works. It's that it's organized locally. So there are more than 2,500 local Indivisible groups all over the country now. Those are led by people who just raised their hand and said, shit is fucked up. I guess I'm going to have to organize something. And that's how these Indivisible groups get joined together, and that's how they build political power, wield political power, and change what's politically possible in this country. So I'm gonna celebrate 10 of them. And if you're here on the Zoom, tell us with your emojis and with your messages in the chat, celebrate these new folks, roll out the red carpet for them, because we need new people here. That's how we win. So Eric from Indivisible Arroyo Grande, California, welcome. Alicia from Indivisible Union County in Blairsville, Georgia. Dave with East Hawaii Indivisible in Poa, Hawaii. Elizabeth with Golden Valley Save Our Democracy in Golden Valley, Minnesota. That's in the Twin Cities suburbs. I got 2 from Minnesota this week. We've got Andrew from Woodbury Indivisible in Woodbury, Minnesota, also in the Twin Cities suburbs. We've got Lynn from Central Nebraska Indivisible with Grand Island, Nebraska. Very red district. As somebody who grew up in a rural and red district, I have a soft spot in my heart for folks who are doing this organizing in places that have not seen organizing of this type. We don't need to just be in blue cities or in blue states. We need to be everywhere. Welcome, Lynn, to the movement. Welcome, Grand Island, Nebraska, to the movement. Amber with Indivisible Wayne County in Marion, New York. Greg with Indivisible Estacada in Estacada, Oregon. Suzanne, North Knox Indivisible in Knoxville, Tennessee. We see this in some of the larger cities. You'll see multiple Indivisible groups. Super healthy, super functional. Usually you're coordinating amongst each other, but you're all representing different communities. Love to see it. And then we've got Indivisible at Virginia Tech. We're seeing an increasing number of university-based Indivisible groups. Daniel, welcome. Thanks for registering in Fairfax, Virginia. And that's 10. I get to do an 11th because we have another international Indivisible group, Melissa with Indivisible Auckland, New Zealand. Would love to visit Auckland, New Zealand. There are more sheep than people there, so there are not more of us than there are of them, but there are more of us than there are of the fascists, and I think the sheep are on our side, so we're going to win. As always, welcome to everybody who is taking up the charge in this moment. This is not going to be won by some leader of some institution. It's going to be won by all of us, and nobody's showing us that more than the folks in the Twin Cities. It's genuinely inspiring to see people power, organized nonviolent people power, repelling a fascist regime that is trying to make us submit. And always, as always, welcome to our MAGA infiltrators. We love the cute pics and video clips that you post to your little right-wing propaganda arms. You found us. We're here organizing for democracy. I hope you learned something. Leah, with that, should we talk about the news of the day before we have Erica join?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay, y'all. I'm going to give a brief update before we get to Erica, because I think that's why y'all are here. We are less than a week out of from the murder of Alex Preddy, and Minnesota is in this state of historic levels of resistance. And everybody is asking, okay, what do we do right now? What is the answer? Is Congress just totally useless and irrelevant? That's usually a fair bet. But the news is Congress is not useless and irrelevant right now. There is a funding bill for ICE that requires Democratic votes that is moving through Congress right now. The government shuts down in 2 days if there isn't action from Congress. Last week, on the first episode of this podcast, and we were first talking about this DHS funding bill, we told you that minutes before we started recording this and joining y'all, we had found out that Jeffries and Whip Clark, these two leadership positions, leaders within the Democratic House Caucus, were not going to whip the vote for the DHS funding bill. That was bad. We were opposed to it. We wanted to see them unify the Democratic caucus on this. They declined to do it. That's a week ago, y'all. Time moves fast. That was a week ago. We told you at the last What's the Plan that we knew, therefore, it would pass the House. And lo and behold, it did. It passed the House of Representatives with 7 Democrats supporting it, providing the necessary margin to get from the House to the Senate. That was last week. And as of last Friday, I'll be honest, the smart money was on the Senate Democrats just following suit, following those 7 Democrats. That's what most people thought was going to happen. But we know that vote stank last week. It is even more rotten now, literally the day after the House Democrats failed to unify against it. The day after, that was the day of the Minneapolis historic shutdown. That's thousands of businesses, tens of thousands of clergy and teachers and nurses and neighbors in sub-zero temperatures showing up in just this historic way to push back against this authoritarian force. And the regime took notice, and they took notice in the most sadistic way possible. The very next day, DHS's secret police responded by murdering ICU nurse Alex Preddy. And then the regime slandered him as a violent extremist while shielding his murderers from accountability. And it was not the murder and it was not the slander that shifted the political climate. It was the public response to the murder and the public response to the slander that shifted the political climate. Because after that, over the weekend, Senate Democrats of all stripes started coming out and saying, well, I can't support this. I'm against the DHS funding bill. Look, y'all, Republicans are scrambling right now to figure out a way out of this. They are so worried. They are talking about that they're releasing new Epstein files. Do you know how fucked things have to be for Republicans to say they would rather talk about Epstein than ICE? That's where we are right now. They are extremely scared about the political climate right now. So that's where we are. Vastly different situation than we were a week ago. So that brings us to literally today, right now in this moment. Senate Democrats are unified opposing DHS funding right now. Unified. And look, I've been plenty critical. We've been plenty critical of Senate Democratic leadership. Right now, they are unifying the caucus against. That is good. That is good. There are 2 ways this ends because funding for the government runs out this weekend. There are 2 ways this ends. Either 1, Republicans cave and give in to Democratic demands to split the bills apart and actually make some concessions on DHS, or Democrats cave and give Republicans more time for no reason whatsoever. So to be specific, a Democratic cave in this moment looks like, 2 weeks of funding for DHS. They say, we got to let temperatures simmer down. We need to get some time to work on a deal together. Fuck that. That's capitulation. We don't want to see that. What we want to see is Democrats going on offense in this moment. And for right now, they're unified, so we should be backing them up. That's the key message. What's the plan? The plan right now is as long as the Dems are fighting, we are behind them 100%. So if you've got a Republican senator, you should be calling them right now. You can take a break, call them right now and say, stop backing up this regime secret police force. And if you've got a Democrat whose name isn't John Fetterman, you should be calling them and thanking them for fighting back in this moment. Encourage them to keep fighting. And if it's John Fetterman, tell him to figure out where the hell his heart is because it's not in the right place right now. Okay, Leah, that's where we are with DHS, but we've got an incredible guest who's going to ground us and guide us. Do you want to introduce Erica?
All right. It is my pleasure to introduce Erica Chenoweth, who is joining in their personal capacity. They are the academic dean for faculty development and the Frank Stanton professor of the First Amendment at Harvard Kennedy School. They are a world-renowned, one of the preeminent experts in the world on social movements, nonviolent social movements in the face of authoritarianism. They have authored or edited 9 books and dozens of articles on mass movements, nonviolent resistance, terrorism, political violence, revolutions, and state repression, including most recently Civil Resistance, What Everyone Needs to Know, and on revolutions. You may know them from the popular discussion of the 3.5% figure, which we will definitely get into today. Erica, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Let me kick off by asking you to ground us a little bit in where we are, right? Because what we are seeing in the Twin Cities is protest and organizing, but it's more than that. It is a society-wide mobilization and non-cooperation to repel a violent occupying force. We're hearing that neighborhoods across the Twin Cities have got like 4% of their residents in signal group chats coordinating rapid response. We're seeing mutual aid training, advocacy, business and economic campaigns, division of labor for specialized tasks. Just last week, a historic general pause in business, shopping, going to school, walk out in sub-zero temperatures. Can you reflect on what this kind of mass opposition means, what was involved in making it possible, what it tells us about the potential and what's needed for actions of this level of disruption to happen on a national level?
Great. Thank you. So I think it's useful to just recall in general what successful movements tend to do in the type of context in which the United States is engaged right now. And we can see in Minneapolis and St. Paul the types of capacities that are needed to defend against autocratic consolidation around the country. So the first thing is related to mass and diverse participation. So who has been engaged in Minneapolis, St. Paul is people from all walks of life, spanning across different sectors, faith, labor, teachers, medical providers, neighborhood and community groups, local leaders, small business owners, veterans. The participation of people from all walks of life unleashes the power and creativity and the networks of everyone involved. The second thing that's been happening there that I think is very instructive and important is that, as you said, Leah, it's not just about people coming out on the streets in shows of mass protest. That has happened. But there have been a huge range of methods with varying degrees of commitment and risk where people can fully express their agency. So we've seen protest, but we've also seen non-cooperation. We've seen non-cooperation boycotts against businesses or calls to boycott businesses that are going along with things. We've also seen the development of alternative institutions, mutual aid, and all kinds of other methods of neighborhood support that are allowing people to have both the resilience they need to meet the moment and the power through the networks to build more resilience. The third thing that's been happening is that the repression, when it has been happening, has been backfiring. And this is important to note that backfire is not something that happens automatically. Usually, states, when they engage in repression, get away with it because either nobody is watching, or the people who are watching, or the recordings that are taken don't get out. So what we have seen is that we've seen abuse and killing, and we've seen people prepared to make sure that that is observed, communicated widely, and that it breaks through information silos. It is absolutely important to point out that Alex Preddy, when he died, was doing that, right? And others around him were doing that. They were observing abuses to make sure that they are witnessed by the world. Actions only backfire when they are witnessed widely and made obvious that the state's violence was unjust and disproportionate to this situation. And that then leads to this really critical shift in power. And that comes through defections, where people in positions of influence begin to change the way they're behaving. So we've seen this. There were police that came out, for example, and said that they were standing basically with the community. Business leaders, some Republican leaders in the state of Minnesota have either left the party or announced they're no longer running for governor in one case. making it attractive to be a business that stands with its community is something that takes organizing, but we've seen it shift the power in Minneapolis and St. Paul because it's made it basically impossible to go along with business as usual. And so then the final point is, discipline and resilience as repression escalates is something that is so important to maintain. Because when people have trained in nonviolent resistance, they've trained in de-escalation, they understand the different methods of nonviolent action that are available to them and the different lawful forms of protest and observation. They know their rights. That means that they equipped with the tools that they need to support their neighbors, even as or even because the risks to their community are increasing. And that sense of discipline is exactly what has made it possible for the Democrats to refuse to fund ICE, right? Because it's clear which side is doing the abusing here. And that's because the community is prepared organizing, not in the conspiratorial sense of organizing, in the how can I best help my neighbors form of organizing. That's what we're seeing there, and what we'll see nationwide if this country gets out of this mess.
Speaking of the impact of organizing, I'm seeing a lot of people in the chat note that I called out Fetterman, and Fetterman, of all people, also voted against the DHS funding this week after spending a long time saying he would never vote for any bill that might encourage a shutdown. He voted against it as well. So, look, I will make an exception to what I just said. If Fetterman is your senator, go and call him and say, thank you for being on the right side of this vote. We need to encourage and then hold him to it for future votes as well. Leah, do we want to go to the second question for Erica?
Absolutely. Although I will just note there are some conflicting reports about the justification Fetterman provided for that. So I would just say you do not in fact have to hand it to him yet. Let's see how things go. Thanks so much for that. I will segue to a related topic, which is that this week we announced the next No Kings for March 28th, which is going to be the largest protest to date in American history. And this coming after No Kings 1, which was at that point one of the largest, No Kings 2, which was the largest to date at that point. Despite these historic displays of organization, Trump is currently escalating his attack on our communities and our democracy. And I think a question that we've gotten and that I would love for you to answer a little bit is, what is the purpose of these large-scale planned one-day mass protests, even of this size?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important not to underestimate the power of one-day protests that are very large. A show of numbers, the ability to organize something that reaches across, every corner of the United States and shows that there are people who are willing to stand up for their neighbors and for their values and for their rights is very powerful, even in symbolic terms. But sometimes it also is important in material terms, too. Studies have shown impacts on voter turnout at midterm elections and in presidential elections and state-level elections. Research has shown impacts on legislative votes, the way that people who are in elected office decide to vote in the end. And research has shown impacts on shifts in public opinion. Now, this is true for research on social movements in general, but those three outcomes have been tied to just single days of protest in some studies. I'd also say that large-scale protest days like that are a way for people to express their agency and invite others to do the same. And I would say that the more a country kind of backslides away from democracy, the more important it is to defend First Amendment rights by expressing them. Because when people don't engage in mass protests, that also sends a signal. And so it is important. And so we shouldn't underestimate the importance of it. We also shouldn't overestimate the importance of it. We know that single days of protest rarely build the type of power that's really needed to fully defend, protect, or improve democracy, especially in a backsliding context. Movements are more than protest. Protest is a tactic. And what is needed are strategies to build momentum, build power, and put pressure on institutions and people in different social, economic, political, and cultural pillars that can actually bring about the change that's needed. And so that's why I, talked about in the Minneapolis-St. Paul case, the different ways that we know that movements win. It's about building those capacities to build power, build momentum, build pressure, and ultimately have leverage over the outcome.
Erica, look, we so appreciate you joining and like grounding us in the research around social movements and anti-authoritarian activism. We try to be driven by that. We don't try to just work with the movement and throw stuff at the wall. There is some throwing the stuff at the wall, but it's helpful to have a framework and an understanding of what works in other countries. And so, thanks for joining us and answering our questions. We monopolize a bit of your time, but there's going to be a live Q&A now. So I'm pleased to say now we are turning to that live Q&A. If you're listening to this on the podcast, these questions have already been asked and answered. If you're here with us on the Zoom right now, you get to ask questions and you get to vote on questions, and we just take the top voted questions. So ones that Erica, me, and Leah can answer, we will answer, and ones that we can't answer, we'll still do our best. So with that said, Laura, you have the top voted question for us. You have asked, we frequently talk about how this movement can't just be against the Trump regime. It needs to be for something. The people of Minnesota are standing up for their neighbors and for their communities. How can we and the Democratic Party use their example to motivate all of us for a better country? Leah, I'm curious about your take, and Erica, your take. We talk a lot about the coalition of no, that you want an ideologically diverse coalition that might not agree on everything is able to say no. What about the coalition of yes? How did those two things fit together?
Erica, do you want to take a first crack at that?
Well, there's a well-known political scientist named Adam Jaworski who in his newsletter said, being against unites, being for divides. I think that's a really helpful way to understand the trade-offs. On the one hand, being anti-authoritarian can build a truly broad set of a cast of characters that otherwise wouldn't necessarily come together to stop a consolidation. Once people begin to articulate whether there's agreement about what that broad coalition might fight together for, usually that's where we see blocks emerge. My take on this is that both things need to happen kind of simultaneously and contemporaneously to one another, but not necessarily by the same set of actors at the same time, because it's really important to stop authoritarianism. And it's really important for there to be movements, groups, and communities articulating a better vision for the country going forward, and for those conversations to be negotiated and play out separately.
I would just add, I think there's a distinction between being for a shared set of values and for an articulated policy agenda. So if you go to a No Kings rally, what you are going to see is a lot of people who are for America, who are for their neighbors, who are for fairness, who are for community, who are for the Constitution, who are for more justice in the world, right? All of those things collectively. What you're not going to see is a list of 10 different policies that everybody who is throwing in for No Kings has all agreed to back in the order that we've agreed to prioritize them. And that's because you simply would never get the breadth of people who collectively come together to promote No Kings to agree on that list. Now, within that formation, there are a bunch of us who are also going to try and push affirmative policy ideas, commitments, visions of what's possible, because we know that ultimately you are going to need to have a coalition that's putting forward, a convincing story of how they're going to make your lives better, both in terms of policy and how they're going to actually make those reforms real. Because we know that a lot of times the gap that we experience is not necessarily that their policies sound good, but that people simply don't believe that they're going to happen. So I don't disagree at all that there is a need for that coalition to articulate the positive vision. But I do think that when you're looking at the immediate imperatives around can we get the largest number of people collectively to come together in defense of common values, but not necessarily in advancement of a shared policy agenda, that is a strategic imperative right now.
Excellently said. Leah, people in the chat love your brain and your heart.
Okay, great, thank you.
Robert from CBFD Indivisible San Diego. It's really exciting to see the announcement of the date for the next No Kings rally. In addition to making it the biggest day of protest ever, what about including an impactful economic action as well? Perhaps a day of boycott/strikes the following Sunday and or Monday, or the announcement of a targeted longer-term boycott. Given that Indivisible will devote a lot of energy to March 28th, is this something that can be discussed with our No Kings partners that focuses on economic action? Robert, have you been listening in on our conversations internally? This is a live discussion. Leah, and I'm the one that accidentally reveals too much, so I might pass it over to Leah about how this fits into our current strategic planning.
Well, what I can say is this is absolutely a live conversation across a bunch of folks within the broad anti-authoritarian coalition. And actions. What we collectively know is that economic campaigning and economic strategies are going to be really important to translate the people power that you see on the streets in something like a No Kings into really targeted and meaningful impact on key collaborators. We know that. We've done some of that work to date, right? If you think about the Spotify campaign last year, which was about stopping Spotify from running ICE recruitment ads. If you think about the Avelo Airlines campaign, which was about stopping Avelo Airlines from conducting the deportation flights that many, many folks in the Indivisible movement, along with Sanford, North Carolina, helped to popularize as a campaign idea and that we were proud to support along the way. We've already done some targeted, and of course the Disney campaign, which everybody here was part of, that brief period where we canceled Disney Plus, and our toddlers were not thrilled, but justice prevailed, and Jimmy Kimmel went back on the air. And I'm still not sure our toddlers accepted that justification entirely, but we're moving on. Long story short, we completely agree that this is a tool set and a toolkit that we're going to have to continue to dig in on in whatever coalition formation is possible to really meaningfully drive it home, because fundamentally we want to be using all the tools in the toolbox right now.
I think I might even take it a step further. I mean, our strategic orientation is that an authoritarian never willingly gives up power. And this is a guy who's headed for an absolute catastrophe in the midterm elections. He's going to lose the House. He's going to lose the Senate. There's going to be accountability. He does not want that. He's going to try to subvert the election or sabotage in some way. That is our current assessment. And if you are going to prevent that, if you're going to prevent the authoritarian from cementing power in that moment, it's not going to be enough to have a historic level of one-day protest. You are going to have a more sophisticated operation that looks something more akin to what we're seeing on the ground in the Twin Cities, but at the national level. No Kings is a tactic within a multiplicity of tactics, and we should be developing those tactics and the size of our movement going forward to that moment so we're ready to actually push back and repel that attempt by the authoritarian regime in that moment. Yeah? Okay, next question. And Erica, unless you want to push back on, okay, no pushback. Beverly asks, what is the plan? That's the right question for this place. What is the plan if the Republicans lose the election and Trump declares the results invalid? I will swear, I did not read this question before I just said what I said. What is the plan if just before the election, Trump precipitates a war with a major power and cancels the election? What is the plan if Trump decides there is a new pandemic and the election has to be canceled? I think overall, the plan is there is no referee in the sky who is going to say, that's not right. You're not allowed to do that. You're breaking the rules. Bad. No, the only source of power that is going to organize opposition to that kind of threat to our democracy is organized people power. But Erica, I'm going to give you another bite of the apple if you have specific thoughts of when authoritarians in other countries have used national elections as an inflection point to cement their power, what works?
Yeah, well, among other things, there are really, I'd say, two general patterns in which we really do see mass mobilization emerging in response to authoritarian threats. The first is when there is some kind of backfire or backlash to a killing, a politically motivated killing. And the other is when we see attempts to steal elections. And those are really powerful moments of coordinated, mobilization, because those are moments in which people feel that participating in something bigger than themselves to stand up for their values is required of their conscience. And that's when you sometimes see upswells of mobilization. I think, the most important thing for people to know about the midterm elections, in my opinion, is that they're going to be elections, and people should participate in them and prepare to participate in them and know how to, and should encourage others to do the same, right? So I think people should be prepared to participate in the elections, and then and elect people who are standing up for democracy. And I think the second thing to think about is that there needs to be a strategy for what happens if the scenario that you just read out comes to pass. But the first thing to do is to elect pro-democratic candidates, right? Small d Democrats is what I'm talking about here. And that is itself going to be a challenge. And so people should be, thinking about that. And people should be thinking about the backup strategy for how to make sure that we know if the election is stolen and that we can protect the results. And that might require legal strategies. That might require people to engage in protest and non-cooperation of varying degrees. And it might require, communication strategies and coordination of the kind that we haven't really seen in this country for a long time. All nonviolent methods of resistance that can challenge an attempt to make an election invalid by an autocrat. And we have the ingredients in our country to make sure that people elect pro-democracy candidates and that those candidates are seated. And we just need to go with confidence in knowing we can do that, even if it is a little bit uncertain.
I think you're hitting on something that we talk about pretty regularly, which is that we are not going to give the would-be authoritarians powers that they do not have.
Yeah.
Like Donald Trump does not have the power to cancel the election. Elections are run by states and localities. Donald Trump can make all kinds of crazy declarations, and then the collective organizing and weight that we are building is going to be pushing back on that, right? We talk about this in terms of an entire set of things we have to do this cycle. We've got to shape the elections. And by that I mean we got to get the candidates through the primaries that we need to see as future leaders. We've got to protect them all through the year. We're going to have to essentially play whack-a-mole with the various threats that we're collectively going to face to election integrity, election administration, voter rights across the country. We've got to win them. As you mentioned, we should not forget the part where we actually just have to straight up win the elections in really, really big numbers. And then we may have to enforce the results, which is to say, on the back end, ensure that the people who receive the most votes take office. And there are a lot of different ways that threats could manifest on this front over the next year. And I could go through all of them, and then we would finish out the podcast, and that would be the end of it. What we've got to have is the flexible organizing capacity and the kind of tactical capabilities and ability to innovate our tactics that is necessary to push back in a range of different ways.
Mm-hmm. We've got a theme, several questions on this front. So Jean is doing a follow-up here. Next highest voted question. Threats to the 2026 election go way beyond voter access. They include legal and security threats. Starting to see the seizing of records yesterday in Fulton County, Georgia. How do you assess the risk? What can be done? Leah, internally we are preparing for a lot of threats to the election infrastructure for these midterms. The places that we are most worried about are places where Republicans and members of the regime control the election infrastructure. So that's especially in a place like Georgia, which at the state level is controlled by Republicans, in a place like Iowa as well, in places where there are competitive elections, and also who knows what the regime is going to do when that happens. The elections are months and months and months away. How do you prepare for that eventuality? What can you do now? How much of your brain space should be going to that versus, Erica, to your point, just win the damn elections, focus on that? Curious, Erica, for your thoughts of if you were telling somebody you've got 100 units of effort to spend on preventing the undermining of our elections, how much of that is in traditional build-up grassroots power and build up your voting power and get behind candidates, and how much of that is prepare for what they're trying to do?
Yeah. Well, I'd say we need 300 points, Ezra. 100 points on the division of labor, which is parties need to run candidates who can win and who are pro-democracy. So that's really important. The second piece is on the division of labor with just grassroots, mobilization of turnout and other things like that. And then the third is on both building the capacity to make sure that the various things that could happen between now and the next major elections in the country are anticipated and addressed and hopefully even prevented, right, in important ways. And then we have another 300 points on the strategy of enforcing the result if we need to. So I'm sorry to expand the pot, but I do think there the gravity of it, the stakes of it are very high, right? And when I say it, I mean the outcome of the election and our ability to be prepared to make sure that we protect the results if we need to.
Next. Good. Christine asks from North Central Florida, I have been calling senators and demanding the termination of the current ICE missions and not funding DHS/ICE until significant reforms are in place. When I call Democratic senators, I've been emphasizing that I have a faceless, lawless, secret police force invading and terrorizing our cities and neighborhoods in the name of a law enforcement, quote unquote, law enforcement. Is much worse than a shutdown, and that they must not cave before getting what is needed. Is this the right message? Christine, what I would say is if you were a North Central Florida resident, calling Democratic senators from around the country, while it might feel good, is not productive. We had a special folder when I worked in Congress. We had a special filing place for communications that came in from out of the state. We called it the trash can because it was a trash can. We didn't pay attention to those. And that's not even a knock on those senators or House members who do that. That's how the democracy is set up. It is set up to represent constituents. If you are not a constituent and you call into them, they're like, I don't care about this. A good staffer will try to forge you back to your senators. Your senators don't give a shit about you. They're two Republican bootlicking fascist enablers. And so I understand why you would want to go and call Democratic senators. I understand where that comes from. It's not where I put my energy if I were you. Leah, do you want to feel free to push back on any of that, but also do you want to talk about how concerned should we be about the message? What is the right message? What is the role of calling a member of Congress in a moment like this?
Sure. The role of calling a member of Congress in a moment like this is for them to understand as fast as possible the level of energy and outrage around the country on this. And I would say that I've gotten a lot of questions about like what are the specific messages here? What are the specific frames? All of the different policy pieces that are moving. And I think it's probably worth taking one big step back and noting that a lot of what we're trying to do here is just hold together Democrats on an offensive play in relation to an issue that they only recently realized that they were going to have to make an offensive play on, and that they have historically got a long record of being pretty skittish around, right? If you've been with us all over the course of the year, you heard us talk about the Lake and Riley Act, which was an incredibly problematic MAGA messaging bill, anti-immigrant bill that was passed with a hefty number of Democratic votes earlier last year. And I think that reflected the general level of fear Democrats had at the time and have had for most of the last year around being perceived as insufficiently tough on immigration. So we're moving them very, very fast on this. And the most important thing for me is not necessarily landing the exact perfect message on the shutdown. It is collectively convincing them that there is a huge amount of energy. There is a lot of attention on them personally. Their votes will be remembered, and that this moment is properly being understood as a referendum on whether we are going to have a lawless, out of control, secret police force terrorizing people across this country and ripping families apart. The phrase that I've started using is like, I think it's possible to try to play chess when you actually really just need to be playing bumper cars. This is a bumper cars moment. People just need to know that there is a lot of energy and it's coming at them.
Leah has been saying chess versus bumper cars for a long time, and I think it's an excellent analogy. Stephen asks, I'm glad you brought this up, Stephen. Can we see if Bruce Springsteen will let us use his new song as a No Kings anthem and maybe also perform it at one of our rallies? Erica, I am going to go to you, but just because I'm curious about because of your connection to Bruce, and I know you can really pull some strings for us. No, I'm curious about the cultural element of successful people-powered protests. But before I get there, I have a more narrow ask for everybody here. I want all of these musicians at No Kings 3. If anybody, let me put this out. If you have a connection to Jesse Wells, love Jesse Wells, get him connected to us so we can get him on stage. If you've got a connection to Bruce Springsteen, get him on stage. Let us know. Lucinda Williams has a new album out of protest songs. Get her connected to us. We want to get him on stage. This is a time to start reaching out. These folks should be out there. I saw a great video recently that it was just like the most pathetic non-rock and roll thing you can be doing in this moment is not calling out the fascist regime. If you want any kind of credibility, if you want to be anywhere near the sphere of cool, and you are a public entertainer of any sort that depends on that as your identity or a piece of your identity, you should be out there now. You should be out there now. And we want you there. We want you there. So please connect them to us. We want to get them plugged in to this to make it as big as possible. Okay, Erica, with that said, I filibustered a bit to give you some time to think. What about the cultural side of protest?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to say about it. I would say there is a saying that people are probably familiar with, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And a lot of times that's referred to as an internal movement thing, like a movement's culture eats its strategy for breakfast. But it's also kind of applicable to like whether a movement can build the kind of popular appeal and speak to people's emotional state, and whether they can like speak to people's heart and help them to self-identify with the vision that a movement is leading and laying out. And sometimes the only way for that to happen is definitely not getting people like me to come and talk about numbers and and research. It's like having somebody write something that is super powerful as a song or as a poem, or doing some incredible public art, or, you know, writing a new play and having that play censored and then doing a reading of it in public, you know, like these types of things have been central to most of the successful movements for democracy over the last 100 or so years, because they are able to speak to how people feel about what's going on. And how people feel about what's going on is so much more important than how they think about it in terms of motivating them to stand up and do something with others. And when they see people they admire, you know, talented people that they admire, willing to stand with them, that too can really, you know, attract different segments of the population into formation in ways that otherwise just aren't allowed. The last thing I'll say about it is that sometimes the best way to document what a country is going through is through art. Because sometimes it's really hard to put it into words.
That's a really fascinating thought. I'm gonna have to think on that one.
Leah, if you could pick one artist, who would you have show up at No Kings 3? It's Kesha. You love Kesha.
It's Kesha. Yeah, it's always Kesha.
Okay. And Erica, for what it's worth, you're a rock star to us, so thank you for being here. Eric from Orchard City, Indivisible, in Campbell, San Jose, California, has the next question. It's now midterm election primary season. If any incumbent Democrat House members are not currently willing to go on record publicly in favor of impeaching Trump at all, even though they're currently not likely to have the votes in the House to pass impeachment, then will Indivisible target them for a primary challenge this year? If yes, then what is the process? Indivisible will follow to pursue a primary challenge. If no, then why not? We, the people, get the change that we want only when we hold those in power, including members of Congress, accountable to us, and Trump and his regime are committing impeachable offenses daily. Eric, I love where you're coming from here. This is primary season. And if you've been just thrilled with the performance of the Democratic Party over the last 14 months, you get to take this season off. You don't have to do anything. It's fine. You'll just vote for whoever comes out of the primary. That's cool. I respect it. Different people have different opinions. If you have been pissed off at a feckless party, at a party that has failed to meet a moment, at a party that surrenders when they have the upper hand, at the party that does not treat this moment like an existential crisis for democracy, then this is your moment. This is your moment to organize and demand a party that represents you. This is not about picking petty fights with people. This is about building a Democratic Party that fights back. And the time to do that is the primaries. After the primaries, y'all, we're going to rally around whoever wins. It's going to be between a fascist or a coward in the Republican Party and some flavor of Democrat. We're very clear that's an easy choice. But the time to determine what flavor of Democrat we get is the primaries. There are more than 140 Democrats representing House districts that are D plus 10, Democrat plus 10. We call those safe districts. Do we have 140 fighters in the House of Representatives? You know damn well we do not. Many of those Democrats are not going to face a primary challenge because nobody is popping up, because it feels like a conflictual thing. Isn't the real enemy the Republicans? Isn't the real enemy the fascists? Why are we fighting among ourselves? That's how the thinking goes. And I hear that. And what I would say is, Primaries are where we get to determine who our fighters are that we're putting up against the fascists, up against the Republican enablers. And so I would highly, highly encourage you to get involved this season, whether there's somebody representing you who you think is a weakening Democrat, or whether there's somebody across the country who you want to Leah's, I'm getting the hook. If you want to support for leadership within the Democratic Party. Leah, specific to this question, though, what is Indivisible's nationals process for getting behind primary challengers?
Right. So our national process is a bottom-up process, right? So our overall take is we can have all the opinions we want. We can share all of our thoughts in this space that we want. And also, our takes on individual primaries or races are not as relevant as whether there is a local Indivisible group on the ground that is getting behind a candidate and that is willing to put real time and effort and capacity into pounding the pavement to get them elected. And so the way that our endorsement process starts is not that Ezra and I go in a room and decide who we're going to back. It's that we look around and see where are the places where Indivisibles are really going in and prepared to put some real work into electing the kind of candidate that they've determined is going to be a fighter. Now, we've got a national set of criteria that do kind of address some kind of core must-haves that really determine whether somebody meets some basic standards for kind of being a fighter. And it's about, where does your money come from, right? Are you accepting corporate donations? Are you accepting crypto or APAC or fascist funders? Are you committed to an accountability agenda, right? Like, are we actually going to have consequences for folks going forward here? Stuff like that. But fundamentally, we're not trying to send people like a 50-page policy questionnaire. I have filled those out as a policy director. I do not think they are actually a particularly helpful tool for ultimately shaping people's policy. I can tell you, I remember some very painful moments where I was like looking up the policy and trying to figure out what it was as I filled them out. Nonetheless, what we are going to do as Indivisible National is come in behind some of the folks who are doing this and provide additional support at the national level to make sure that we get across the finish line. Now, the other thing I do want to note is this question is specific about impeachment as a criteria. And I actually think it's worth maybe like 2 minutes on how we think about impeachment right now, because this has come up a lot over the last month in particular as we're watching just a parade of horrors and crimes, and really every month before that, because it's been a big parade. Our take is that Donald Trump has merited impeachment since basically like week 2 of his administration week 1 of his administration, right? And there's no shortage of different ways in which he has violated the standards for office and is meriting of impeachment. And so if the question is like, does he deserve it? The answer is absolutely yes. If the question is, should we make a strategic focus to emphasize impeachment and campaigning for impeachment versus pushing back on ICE right now, versus campaigning to try to stop the one big beautiful bill with Medicare cuts, versus some of the campaigning that we've collectively done that are on issues that are really tangible and salient and directly impactful to people who we need to hold with us or win into our coalition. That's a different calculation. And from our perspective, what we're really trying to do right now in this period where we don't have the votes to impeach, we should be real, Democrats might get to more alignment within the Democratic Party, but we do not, in fact, control the House of Representatives or the Senate, so we're not going to successfully vote to impeach him right now. During this time when we don't have the votes collectively to impeach, what we want to do is focus on the issues where we can either mitigate harm immediately or where we can build our political constituency such that we can maximize the coalition that is going against these folks for the period when we need to have accountability.
Erica, I would invite you, you can comment on any of this if you'd like. I'm particularly interested, I've started talking more to folks in pro-democracy movements in other countries, and this issue of a feckless opposition party, a divided opposition party, a status quo opposition party that is disappointing the grassroots organizing is an issue that seems to come up a lot. And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts on what is the role of a unified, aggressive opposition party, and is it possible to achieve what we want without that?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think there's some debate about it. My sense of it is that when the mechanism through which, pro-democracy movements have won is through the elections, it has happened because they were able to get the opposition party to act like one, or they were able to unite opposition parties, because a lot of these are parliamentary systems and they have like weak and divided opposition parties, to unite and create a bloc upon which they ran a single candidate. So what we have is something that's kind of different in the sense that we have really functionally a two-party system. And within the Democratic Party, there are factions. And so it's slightly different because the Democratic Party wants to organize those factions rather than having a popular movement pull them together and make them do something. And so, I don't actually know what the appropriate strategy is, but what I do know is that that it's generally movements that lead opposition parties into their opposition posture and allow them to get the power they need in order to effectuate the outcome through that, as opposed to the reverse, right? So it's usually not going to be in a context like ours, the opposition party itself, which is like by definition weak and in the minority and not in a position institutionally to make as much of a difference. The power for them is going to come from a mass movement.
You heard it from Erica. Be the opposition movement that leads the opposition party where it needs to be. And then our editorial on that would be get involved in a Democratic primary near you. Adopt one or two that you think are the places where you want to invest some time and energy. Maybe they're where you are, maybe they're across the country, but find those. That's something that you can do right now. And look out for Indivisible's national endorsements. There will be a few coming out in the next couple weeks based on what we're hearing from locals. Erica, different Erica, asks, we need to unmask the vocabulary of the Trump regime and our politicians. We must refuse euphemisms like enhanced enforcement, security operations, or quote-unquote public safety, and instead name these abuses as racial cleansing and state violence. This is a national